Before we start today's show today, I want to thank our great new sponsor, MyPillow. That's right, MyPillow. They sent me one of those, Mike Lindell and the guys did, and I've been sleeping on it for a couple of weeks now, and I've never slept better. Hey, I've got a huge and busy schedule. Not only do I do the show, but we run an advertising agency. We help other podcasters with their shows throughout the country. We're constantly talking to folks, going to concerts. So my sleep is very important to me. So thanks to MyPillow. And remember, it's got a 10-year warranty guarantee, 60-day money-back guarantee. And yeah, you see MyPillow in stores like Walmart and Walgreens, but you can only get the premium pillows by calling MyPillow directly. So grab you one of those premium pillows. Call this number right here, 1-800-338-2330, 1-800-338-2330. Reference the code SGNP when you talk to them and say, hey, I want that premium pillow that Darren on SGNP has. It's that simple. They'll sell it to you, and it'll make life a whole lot better. So if you're having trouble sleeping, call MyPillow today, 1-800-338-2330. Use the code SGMP or go to their website, mypillow.com, and check them out. Hey, make sure you tell them SGNP sent you.
Welcome to SGNP with your hosts, Darren Sutherland and Jeff Steele, one of the fastest growing Christian music podcasts of its kind. Darren and Jeff discuss industry information you will not find from your local radio station or in a magazine. Sit back for the next bit and take a listen to SGNP. The fun is about to begin.
And welcome back once again, folks, to Southern Gospel News Podcast, SGNP. Darren Sutherland and the good doctor, Jeff Steele. Jeff, how you doing, my friend?
Well, I'm doing good. It's I don't know when people would hear this, but it's Wednesday night here, and I'll actually be preaching here in a little while at a prayer meeting in my church.
There you go. And always fun. Wednesday nights are a good time in church, I believe. You usually get to
Well, that's when you meet we have an eating meeting right before we go to church. So we eat at 5:30. Then at 6:30 we have adult Bible study, youth, they meet, the children's church and the nursery and everything else. So it's a big deal here.
You know what, Jeff? You know what's funny about eating at church? And you've been there being a pastor and traveling around singing and this, that, and another. But when you eat at church, there's been a time in all of our lives when we've been asked to try something. And you know where I'm going with this. And you try it, and with a straight face, you have to say, that's okay, or that's good. Have you ever been put in that position, Jeff?
There was a lady at one of my churches, and I'll refrain from calling the names, because I've been at several in my life now, and we eat a lot of churches on the road, too. This particular lady told me one time, she said, now, Brother Jeff, she said, I've been here a lot of years. She said, when I see you go through the line, she said, if I see you pick up a spoon to dip something out and I know you shouldn't eat it, either because of where it has come from or the terribleness of the taste, she said, just watch me. She said, I'll shake my head no. She said, if I do that, you put the spoon down and just pass it on by. She said, if I say yes, if I nod my head yes, it's okay. I have always been grateful for that dear lady through the years because she never steered me in the wrong direction. But yes, I've been right that place you're talking about.
And I think that's the main reason the good Lord created Kentucky Fried Chicken buckets. Because when you're at church eating, you know you're safe 9 times out of 10 with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken. So,
well, what we do here, we have a different group that prepares the meals every week, and they get the money. If we make money that night, the youth do it a night. There's another group does it another night. And what I see a lot of here, I see a lot of Chick-fil-A. I see a lot of meals that people barbecue they picked up at some place. And I just have to believe it's for that exact reason you just mentioned.
Well, I could tell you about banana pudding one time that had M&Ms in it, but I'll stop at that. We're not talking about food today, Jeff. We're talking about gospel music duos and duets and folks that have sung gospel songs, husband and wives, 2 people together. You know, we see trios all the time out there. We see quartets. We see soloists. But the duets, Jeff, are underrated a lot of times, but when you start to think about them, they're there. In gospel music, it started, my buddy Jeff Turner, who's a historian up in Missouri, I said, Jeff, where did it all start? He said, Darren, it started with a guy right up there in Canton, Georgia, near you. A guy named Leroy Abernathy that wrote a few songs, him and Shorty Bradford. Jeff, duets have made quite an impact on gospel, or singing gospel music, have they not?
Well, Darren, we have to differentiate a little bit between duets and duos. You and I were talking about this earlier this week, and we really were talking about like husbands and wives that kind of serve as the nucleus of a group. Jeff and Sherry Easter, Claude and Connie Hopper. And once you open that thing, it's just wide open. Joel and Labriska Hemphill. There are so many duos. Now, I'm not talking about duets, because a lot of these duos, like Claude and Connie, they don't sing a lot of songs together, but they're on stage with their family group every night, and they were the ones that started it. Then you got Hubert and Jeanette Cook. They branched out and did do some duets. That duo did a duet, but they're really the nucleus of a group, the singing cooks. So, duets, that would be like in gospel music, Vince Gill and Carrie Underwood. They had a gospel duet.
They sang the best rendition of, I know it like the back of my hand, dadgummit. Jeff, what's the song? We both know it. Carrie Underwood and Vince Gill sang How Great Thou Art, that I've ever heard.
Right.
That I've ever heard, period. And if you don't...
But there's a difference. You have to agree there's a difference between a duet and a duo.
Okay.
And we're kind of touching on both of them.
Yeah.
Because, Vince and Carrie, that's a duet.
Yeah.
Conway Twitty and Loretta Lynn, that's a duet. A duo would be more like Jeff and Sherry, Easter, and again, we could just go down the list. They're all over the place. Troy and Katie Peach, Tracy and Libby Stupple, Carol and Priscilla Magruder. Those are duos that might not necessarily sing a duet. So we're kind of talking about both today.
You forgot Howard and Vestal. How could a man that lives in Alabama forget about Sand Mountain's original Howard and Vestal? And a lot of times...
Oh, it's worse than that. Rusty Goodman was born about 2 miles from where I live. So You're right. Bad on me there.
Let me ask you this, Jeff, and you can answer this. And what prompted this show was I was listening the other day to your church service, and you can look at Redeeming Grace Church on our Facebook page, Southern Gospel News Podcast. And I was noticing your wife singing with Brad, and they did an awesome job there, and you can see that. But then when
they're both part of our praise team.
Right.
So Sherry's the praise team, Brad's the worship pastor. For some reason, and I still don't have this figured out, I'm not in the praise team. I've never been asked. I don't understand that.
Yeah, you get up on stage when you want to. You know how preachers are.
Maybe I do understand it.
So, but I noticed when Sherry went from singing with Brad, and that's her son, and it's a great mix and a great sound. But when she went to singing with you, Jeff, it was almost like it was lock, step, and key. Of course, guys been doing it for, up 10 years. How many years y'all been singing together?
We have been married 36 years, and we've been singing the whole time. 36
years. So 36 years, you kind of know where each person's voice is going. I would say this, and I'm not referring to you and Sherry, but let me give you an example. If you listen to Howard and Vestal, Vestal carried the bucket, so to speak, with the singing. You know that, and I know that. But there was something special about when Howard's voice blended in with Vestal's that made it perfect. You follow me? And you could say the same thing in the country arena. You had two great singers in Conway and Loretta Lynn. They did a gospel album, cut songs like In the Sweet By and By, You'll Never Walk Alone, that kind of stuff. Just great mixtures of their voices and great sounds. And it made it wonderful. I mean, another one, Porter Wagner and Dolly Parton. Who can forget their rendition of Daddy Was an Old-Time Preacher? I mean, a great song. So we can go on and on about duos and duets and however you want to define them. But there's been a ton of them out there, Jeff, and I think sometimes we don't give them enough credit. Now, off the top of your head, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Other than Jeff and Sherry Steele, okay, what duet does Jeff Steele like to hear?
Well, let me say two things real quick. Number one, a lot of people don't know that Dolly Parton, of course, they may know she wrote that song, I Will Always Love You, that Whitney Houston had such great success with. Mm-hmm. They may not know that she actually wrote that song, I Will Always Love You, for Porter Wagoner when she made the decision to leave the show that he brought her to the table with. Mm-hmm. She decided to leave that show and go out on her own, and she wrote that song to and for and about Porter Wagoner. And I want to apologize to all Porter's people. His name is Porter Wagoner, not Wagner. It's Wagoner. But she wrote that song for him. And the other thing I want to mention real quickly is that in deference to some of our dearest friends, Jeff and Sherry Easter, right, who were here first, I have never, ever referred to our family as, or my wife and myself, as Jeff and Sherry Steele. I always refer to us as Sherry and Jeff Steele because Jeff and Sherry spent so much time developing that brand and that name and so much money in marketing. I would never, ever come along and try to steal their thunder. They're great in and of themselves. They have that brand, Jeff and Sherry. So I just refer to us as Sherry and Jeff. You know, I like our singing, of course, but there's a lot of them out there I like. I always like Hubert and Jeanette Cook. Just something about their sound, as you said, together. You couldn't beat it.
You know what? We're going to take a break here in just a second, but I'm going to throw something out there to you, and we'll tell this in just 1 second after this break. You remember Winona and Naomi Judd, right?
Sure.
Do you know Naomi married a quartet man?
Oh, yeah.
Don't tell it. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll tell about it in just 1 second. You're listening to SGNP, Southern Gospel News Podcast. Today we're talking about duos and duets, and the fun has just begun.
Hi, folks. This is Arthur Rice, and you're listening to SGNP.
Come see what all the smoke is about at Tony Gore's Barbecue and Grill in the heart of the Smokies, Sevierville, Tennessee. Start off with T's loaded tater chips, some great sweet tea, then have some of his famous fried chicken, a pulled or sliced pork plate, or the best barbecue ribs in the Smokies. And oh, did we mention homemade mac and cheese? And dessert lovers, it's worth the trip just for a piece of cake. Voted the best barbecue in the Smokies, Tony Gore's Barbecue and Grill in Sevierville, Tennessee. And remember, gospel music fans, you never know who you'll see while at Tony Gore's Barbecue and Grill. For more information, visit them 24/7 at TonyGore.com.
And welcome back to SGNP. Darren Sutherland, the good Dr. Jeff Steele here. Today we're talking about duos and duets and that have sang gospel songs that have all blessed us. We all know about the quartets. We all know about the mixed groups. We all know about the trios that were made popular in the 90s. And we know about the soloists from Ivan Parker to Kenny Chesney or whoever. But we don't hear much about the duos and the duets. Now, Jeff, right before the break, I said this to you. I said, we all know Naomi and Winona sold over 30 million records, songs like Why Not Me, all kind of great things. I think their rendition of Amazing Grace is one of the greatest hymns that I've ever heard. But Naomi, she married a quartet man. Do you know who that quartet man was, Jeff? That's your trivia question for today.
I already spilled the beans on it. Larry Strickland, and he had Palmetto State for a while.
He was in Palmetto State for a while, and that's fun. That's fun. Maybe we have to get Naomi on and talk about that. We talk about duos and we talk about duets. Somebody that we haven't mentioned, and we've mentioned so many, is a group that is a duo that once their children were retired and had businesses of their own, came back as a duet and a soul duet and traveled around together, and that's Joel and Labriska Hemphill.
I can tell you about Joel. When I was really giving serious thought, the Lord had already spoken to me about leaving the road back in 2004 or 5, somewhere around there. I needed somebody to kind of put it all in perspective for me. And I called Joel, And I said, buddy, I'm just looking for some perspective here. And Joel told me something that day, because I was just telling him about how the Lord was calling us off the road and to take a church. And Joel said, Jeff, he said, sometimes the Lord speaks to us through our desires. I said, explain what you're talking about. And Joel Hemphill told me, he said, many times our desires are alien to the plan of God. He said, but sometimes God will lead us in a situation through what we really want, through what our real desires in our heart. And I'll tell you, I took those words and I kind of jumped on them, because I think he was right in my case, that I really wanted to pastor again, and God used that desire to bring me back into the pastorate. And Joel was so wise, and I appreciated him so much. I still talk to him fairly frequently, and he's just, of course, he's an older man now, but he's a man with great wisdom, and he and his late wife, Labriska, they just had a blend that was hard to beat. You might not want to hear Joel, you might not want to hear Labriska, but you sure did love to hear Joel and Labriska together.
Another genre of gospel music that we haven't mentioned as we're going through this today, and I'll throw this out there to you, that we haven't mentioned, is our buddy Stephen Curtis Chapman and Twyla Paris done a timeless song back in the day called Faithful Friends. And being faithful friends, Jeff, means you stand for one thing. And I think that's what a lot of these duos and duets have in common. They stood for one thing together. And when you sing as a duet, Jeff, you have to believe the same thing. Don't you agree?
I think you may not believe exactly the same thing about certain areas of your life, but I think when it comes to the cross and the blood of Christ and God's sacrifice on our behalf, I think you sure got to have the same idea on that. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. You take a complete agnostic or an atheist. I'm not judging anybody, but you're not going to get the same sound out of somebody that doesn't even believe in God, and then somebody who does. You're not going to get the same sound that you get out of two people who are believers in God and believers in Christ and his sacrifice for us. I think you're dead on the money there.
And another great duo that done a great song talking about friends. And you can't ever turn on a gospel station, contemporary station, without hearing Michael W. Smith and Amy Grant singing Friends. And a friend's a friend forever, and the Lord's the Lord of them. That tells a story right then and there, and it's so good. Going back, let's talk some more about our gospel music friends and how they have done it. Jeff, how has Jeff and Sherry Easter and their duet been able to stand the test of time? They've been on the road now, I don't know how many years, but they've been on the road for a long time singing gospel music, done everything from the Gaither homecomings to small churches to arenas, and they've had a sound that some might say isn't truly Southern gospel, but yet they've been embraced by Southern gospel, contemporary, country Christian, whatever you want to talk about, for a long, long time. How do they keep it going like that?
Well, you're going to hate the fact that you asked me that question, because I come back to this one word so many times, and that is kindness. I'm telling you, this happened to Sherry and myself. My Sherry, we were in West Virginia one night, and we were singing, and we hadn't been on the road that long. Tell you how short the time was we've been on the road. I was the only bus driver on the bus that night. And that was the only date we had that week. That's how ridiculously stupid we were. We left our home in Nashville to go to West Virginia for one date. Well, we got there and set up our product table. And that night at intermission, a pastor came up to me and he said, Pastor Steele, he said, I pastor a large church down the road. He said, and if you would stay over and come to my church tomorrow at 11 o'clock, he said, we'll pay you $1,500 if you'll come to my church tomorrow. Well, I was so thrilled, because now we weren't just there for that one date. So I told Jeff Easter that night at intermission, I said, man, you're not going to believe it. I told him the same story I just told you, that we'd come for one date. There was another church that had offered us this amount of money to come the next morning. And Easter looks at me and he says, and it ain't through yet. I had no idea what he was talking about. So the intermission ends, and we go backstage, and Jeff and Sherry are going to go on, and then we're going to go on right behind them. But they met us backstage, and they were both crying. I mean, tears just streaming down their face. I had no idea. I thought somebody might have died. And through tears, Jeff reached into his pocket, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to my wife and I. And we opened it up, and there were $500. There was $500 in that envelope. And they explained to us that when they're on the road, they don't get to attend their home church like they'd like to, and that God had convicted them about giving to specific groups on the road as they felt led. And they just wanted us to know how much they loved us, and they gave us $500.
Wow.
I just described to you $2,000 that appeared right before me that night in the realms of reality, that church that booked us on the spot, and Jeff and Sherry giving us $500. And look, this was years ago. I'm not trying to tell on them or anything like that. I know they do it all the time. They do it repairing other people's buses. And the whole reason I tell that story is you asked what was so special about them. And this is not to diminish their talent in any way, because they are wonderfully talented people. But they're so kind. And, you know, when you ask the question, how does a group stay out there as long as they have the success that they've had, and still out there on the front lines, I just have to tell you, I told this on Facebook not long ago, there are a lot of people that I'd like to write just like them. There are other people that I'd like to sing just like them. But when you ask me who I'd like to be more like, I'd like to be more like Jeff and Sherry Easter, and that's just the truth.
Nice. You know, I'm going to tell you about my favorite duo, and you've never heard of them. But I promise you, the thousands of listeners that have been out there have seen this duo in some form or format during their lifetime. And, Jeff, it goes back to when I was a teenager in church. There was a little couple, and they've both gone on to be with the Lord now, named James and Mary Devers. And the pastor would say, does anybody have a song? And inevitably, Miss Mary always had a song. Now, James would get up behind her and play his little Gibson guitar, by the way, or his little rhythm guitar, whatever it was, and they would sing songs like Beautiful Flowers, I Want to Stroll Over Heaven with You. And it was two people that, Jeff, you have never heard of before. You've never seen James and Mary Devers. Wouldn't know them if they walked up. But James was a little man, about 5'8", and Miss Mary may have been 6 foot tall. But they just love the Lord, and they were a couple that loves the Lord. And I think sometimes you mentioned at the beginning of the show, there's duos and duets. They were the consummate duo. They were husband and wife. They sang those songs on the couch together. You know, when we talked to Hubert and Jeanette Cook years ago, tell us about the first tape you ever made. Well, we sat in our trailer with a cassette recorder that they had bought at Sears or Kmart or somewhere, and they run a cord through the King James Bible sitting on the coffee table because Hubert had quit working in the coal mine, and they recorded their first tape. They were a duo, not a duet. So you're so right. I think God makes duos, Jeff, and maybe man makes duets. What do you think of that?
I think microphones and equipment can make a duet. But you're right. Only God can make a duo. And, man, I don't believe I could have said that any better. I think you just told exactly what needed to be said. And that's why, quite frankly, after all these years, Claude and Connie are still a duo. The Hoppers, what a great group. But that group really metamorphosized from a duo, not a duet, but a duo. I don't think I've ever heard Claude and Connie sing a duet, but there's no question when you say the Hoppers, you're talking about Claude and Connie and everything that's grown out of that duo. And it just goes on and on. Mom and Dad Spear, what a duo they were. And they produced the Spears that ended up producing Ben and Brock and all that group for so many years. And I think they're even back now. The Spears are going to make another go of it, and thank God for that. But it all stems from a strong, as you said, God-made duo. And one of the things that I look for in the future, Troy and Katie Peach, I had the privilege of marrying them. Troy was with our group, the Steels, for a number of years. He was and is a member of our family. And they asked me would I perform their wedding, and I was only too happy to do it. It was during Christmas break. And they asked me, both Troy and Katie asked me, you talking about a God-made duo, they asked me, said, would you present the gospel at our wedding and give an invitation? And I looked at them, I said, guys, that's normally not a part of a wedding, and they were just adamant. They had to have the gospel presented and an invitation given. Well, they knew more than I did, those young punks, even way back then, because I think we had 3 or 4. I presented the gospel, gave an invitation. We had 3 or 4 got saved at their wedding. That's a God-made duo, and now they're getting to sing a lot together because Katie takes Libby's place a lot of times when Libby can't be with the group. And it wouldn't surprise me if when the whole thing's said and done someday that they don't end up with their own group and doing their own thing, because they are a God-made duo. It's just that simple.
I'm going to throw another one out there to you that when they sang together, they brought the hairs up on the back of your neck. And your mom and dad and my mom and dad would say the same thing. But Johnny and June Carter Cash.
Oh, my goodness. I had a double album. Yes, it was an actual album that they did one time. And, there again, you just couldn't beat their sound. It was almost like one person was singing when they sang together. And to me, that's when a duo becomes a duet. When you get a God-made duo and then God leads them to sing together, then you really got something.
Jeff, we're going to take a break right here and pay a few bills. Going to come back, and I'm going to ask you about a preacher up in Missouri, about him and his wife, when we come right back. You're listening to SGMP. Today we're talking about duos and duets. And I think we've kind of defined what a duo is and what a duet is. But regardless, it's all about the gospel right here on SGNP.
This is Mac Powell, and what's wrong with living right anyway?
Hey, friends, before we start SGNP today, I've got to tell you a little story. The life of, and it'll take us about 60 seconds, so just bear with me for just a second. The life of being involved in media isn't normal. There's no such thing as 9 to 5. On top of that, I got a daughter graduating college, a son up in North Carolina working, and commercials to produce, and a wife. My wife likes to spend time with me, I think I heard. The bottom line is that everything I do requires energy, focus, and staying in the right mood. Thankfully, I was introduced to this company, Brick House Nutrition, and their amazing product, Dawn to Dusk. Dawn to Dusk is an extended release energy supplement which lasts up to 10 hours, increases energy, improves moods, and stimulates your brain. I need that. Unlike coffee, which I don't drink, there's no crash. I drink tea. It's healthy and physician formulated and has no side effects whatsoever. All the ingredients and information are available for you right there at brickhouse.com. That's brickhouse.com. And right now, listeners to SGNP, Southern Gospel News Podcasters, my listeners and Jeff's listeners, get 10% off a 1-month supply. But only when you use the offer code SGNP at checkout. Go to brickhouse.com. Buy the product Dawn to Dusk. Type in SGNP at checkout and get 10% off. So if you're tired of wasting money on 7 cups of coffee a day and want something new, or just 1 cup of coffee at those fancy coffee places equals about 7 sometimes. You want something that'll give you a boost, enhance your mood, increase your focus? This is for you. Get 10% with the offer code SGNP at checkout when you go to brickhouse.com. That's brickhouse.com. And hey, thanks for listening to SGNP. And thank you again for listening to SGNP this afternoon. Going to close it out. But Jeff, just before the break, I said we can't do a show on duos or duets or whatever one you call them. They were a trio when they first came out, or some may say there was a quartet because that big old fella might have counted 2. I'm kidding. I'm a big old fella, so I can't pick on big old fellas. And you're a big old fella too, Jeff, so we can't really do that. But let's go up to Missouri. And you know who I'm talking about. Carol Magruder and his wife. Great sound together. Great blend together.
Well, and you mentioned the trio part. Stan Cook, who was their third part. If you want to talk about big old guys for a minute, let's talk about Stan.
That's who I was referring to.
He's still very actively ministering, singing, and preaching across the country. I get to talk to him every so often. But Carol and Priscilla, you talk about having a real blend. That they were Carol and Priscilla were United Pentecostal folks, and Carol, actually, I think he was a bishop in the United Pentecostal Church, and he pastored there in Kennett, Missouri, and I think it was the first United Pentecostal church. But I'll tell you about Carol for a minute, because I knew him and Priscilla very well. We spent a lot of time on the bus together. Before he passed away, Carol talked about how in our lives we all need to strive to make our circles bigger. All of us have a circle of friends, and usually they look just like us. They like the same things that we like. They're a part of the same crowd that we're a part of. And when Carol was just about to pass, he talked about the importance of enlarging our circle to include more people, to include different thoughts and ideas, and go different places and see different faces and all those things. And I always remembered that and remember it now fondly, because we're all like that. We all tend to stay in the same circle, and usually it's a small circle, and we all need to strive. Every one of us, no matter what our circle is or who it entails, we need to spend our lives trying our best to enlarge our circle, to take in more people and different ways of thought and all that kind of stuff. And it's just amazing to me, after all the time we spent together, that Carol's parting words were, we need to enlarge our circle, take some time in our lives to enlarge our circle. But my, what a group, the Magruders, just fabulous. Great singers, and their band was unbelievable.
Phenomenal. Jeff, as we close the show out today, we can't close the show out without mentioning this last duet. And duet, duo, however you want to call them, because I think they brought back, a lot of people don't realize this. When the Grand Ole Opry was first built, it was a revival center up in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's why it's often referred to as the Mother Church. But when Vestal Goodman sat down in a recording studio with Mr. George Jones and recorded "O Come Angel Band," I think that's when gospel music fans of today and country music fans of today looked at it and said, you know what? We are family. We can do some great things together. And think about this, Jeff. Think about, we don't get real spiritual on this show because we seek to edify, entertain, inspire, and just have a good time with it. But it's real easy to look at George Jones's life. And it's real easy to look at the possum and say everything he did bad. But at the end of the day, the possum finished well. And a lot of times it ain't how we start, it's how we finished. And him and Vestal, when they sang "O Come Angel Band," Jeff, if that's not finishing well, I don't know what is, my friend.
Well, a lot of people, Darren, many more know it now because the story's been told, but Vestal Goodman actually led George Jones to Christ. And, they sang that song together kind of as an outgrowth of his personal testimony. As a matter of fact, on tonight I'll be preaching at our church, and the focus of my message is where Paul said, I have finished the course and I have kept the faith. And the interesting thing about that is that we tend to think that if we lose a round, if we have a bad round in our life, comparing our lives to a 15-round boxing match, we tend to think if we have a bad round or if we lose a round that we're out of the fight. Well, it's just not true. Paul never said, I won every round, because we know his name hadn't always been Paul. It used to be Saul, and he used to kill Christians and destroy churches. He had some bad rounds. And yet, at the end of the way, God, who's not part of a team of judges, he's the only judge. God doesn't judge us at the end of our lives. He doesn't judge us by the bad rounds. He He judges us by the entirety of our lives. And isn't it great to know that God sees us through the blood of Christ, which doesn't even allow him to see our bad rounds anymore? He doesn't judge us on one or two bad rounds. He judges us on the entirety of our lives. And hey, and this is probably a good stopping place. Isn't it amazing if God can do that? Judge us by the entirety of our lives and not just one or two or three or four bad rounds. Why can't we do that with each other? Why can't we do that with each other? Why can't we do that with our brothers and sisters? If God's going to judge us not by the bad rounds, but by the entirety of our lives, why can't we do that with one another? And maybe that's a good place to leave off today.
Jeff, I'm just going to run down the list real quick before we close. Just some folks that we've mentioned today in these duos and duets for the folks to listen to. Think about this and look their songs up on YouTube. Look their songs up, buy their CDs, their downloads on iTunes. Conway and Loretta, The Judds, Tim and Faith, Porter and Dolly, Carrie Underwood and Vince Gill. You know, another one I wrote down but we didn't mention, Big and Rich. They sang a gospel song together. How about Jeff and Sherry Easter, Carol and Priscilla Magruder, Josh and Ashley Franks, great young artists now that's coming along. We can't forget them. Howard and Vestal, Joel and Labriska, Jeff and Sherry Steele. We didn't mention that.
Sherry and Jeff.
Sherry and Jeff. So many great ones. You know, Leroy Abernathy and Shorty Bradford that started it all. But Jeff, it's Dolly and Kenny Rogers. You know,
Conway and Loretta.
We could go on and on and on. But always remember, there's that James and Mary Devers at your home church. Be proud of them. Hug them this Sunday. Maybe you don't go to church, but you remember them from your childhood. Pick up the phone and call them. Tell them thank you for singing that song, Jeff. Because you know what? People like that's who's blessed us all. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And yeah, this has been a good show. It may not nobody ever download it, may not nobody ever listen to it, but it's lifted me up. This has been a great show.
It's been fun, and you know what? That's what it's all about. If nobody ever downloads one of these, it's been fun. I want to say a special thank you before we close out to everybody that has downloaded our show or that has gone on to the internet. We've got a new website coming out that should be up by the time this podcast is released. It's Southern Gospel News Podcast. Real simple. Southern Gospel News Podcast. You'll be able to go to that website and download any podcast that we have done so far. So if you missed the one with Jason Crabb, you can go back and listen to it. If you've missed the one with Libby Perry Stuffle, the 2-part one, a lot of people said, Darren, I heard the first one, I didn't get to hear the second one. Well, you can hear the second one. If you can find out more information. We are growing, folks. And Jeff, we would be remiss once again if we didn't thank the 60,000 something people that have downloaded our podcast already. Arthur Rice, great show last week. Man, what a blessing that was. But also, you can listen to the shows and get them downloaded to your iPhone, your iPad, or your whatever, Android. We're going to put instructions on the website on how to do that. Folks, media is changing. We're not a radio station. We're talking about great information about gospel music. That's what we're talking about. And it's like I always say, the Brad Steele Project is real simple. Brad's a great writer and singer on his own. Jeff can talk about him. We'll talk about him in another show. But all that means is to remind you of this. Go to somebody 30 and under. Ask them, how do I download Southern Gospel News Podcast into my phone? They'll help you. And before long, Jeff, guess what else is coming up? You're going to laugh at this. You're going to be able to look over to the side of the room and say, Alexa, play Southern Gospel News Podcast, and all of a sudden our show is going to come on there or Google or Apple Home or those fun things. So, Jeff, New Beatty is taking over, but you're right. This has been a fun day in talking about duos and duets.
And so much we didn't get to. I got to tell you, we might ought to talk about coming back and doing another show on this very subject because this was wonderful.
Yeah, it's been fun, and maybe we'll get Jeff Easter on or Jeanette Cook or Naomi Judd or who knows. Maybe we can get Carrie Underwood or Vince Gill. Hey, you know who we didn't even mention? We didn't mention Vince Gill and Amy Grant. They're married. They do Christmas shows together every year and sing gospel songs. And if you've never heard...
You're right. We missed it.
And
we didn't mention Chris and Daryl Freeman.
Hey, we didn't mention Celine Dion and Beau Soleil, whatever his name is, singing the prayer. If you've never heard that, then you've missed it all, my friend. I'm just telling you right. I mean, if God ever gave two people voices, he gave those. Andrew Bocelli, that's his name, and Celine Dion doing the prayer. We could go on and on. Buddy, I appreciate it, man. It's been fun. We'll do this again real soon, all righty?
Good deal.
Thank you for listening to SGMP. Jeff, I got one question for you before we leave.
Hit it.
What's wrong with living right anyway?
Not one thing.
SGNP is excited you chose to listen today. If you'd kindly leave a remark and rating in the podcast remarks section, we surely would appreciate it. Please share with a friend or family member. Look for us on Facebook, Twitter, and our new website, SouthernGospelNewsPodcast.com. And remember the Kia Summer Nights concert series, all 100% free, coming to a town near you. For more information on the concert series or to advertise your products, services, concert event, or new project on SGNP and reach a 100% guaranteed number of people in your area, call Tim Newton at 770-874-3200 or email him today, tnewton@bgadgroup.com. Let us geo-target our ads for you, something radio nor magazine can do.
SGNP is brought to you by Toccoa Falls College in Toccoa Falls, Georgia. For more information on TFC, call 706-886-7299 or visit them online at tfc.edu. That's tfc.edu. Since 1907, TFC, glorifying God through seeking and developing leaders who will impact the world for Jesus Christ.